Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange, and today I'm here to bring you another review video all about science fiction. You know I love the genre and I have some great books to talk about here. These are either new releases or review copies, and in some cases both. And I think I have some science fiction I can recommend to just about everyone, so let's jump in and hopefully add some more books to your TBR. First, let's talk about the Machineries of Empire trilogy by Yoon. I've received these books from Rebellion Publishing. The first book is Ninefox Gambit, the second book is Stratagem, and the third is Revenant. I have read all three of these books, but for the sake of keeping this spoiler free, I'm only going to talk about the plot of this one, but I'll talk about the series as a whole and let you know if I think you should read it. Now, this is a piece of hard military science fiction that follows a female officer who agrees to have her body tethered to the soul of a brilliant dead general. He was famous because he never lost a battle. However, he was also famous because he possibly went crazy. You find out early on that he possibly killed his own people in order to win a battle. And it's a bit of a risk for this young woman to take on this presence and really attach herself to this mind. And so a lot of the story is the interplay between these two characters. And you really get to see how the female officer Cherished has to learn to work together with this dead General Zhidao. And I really love the characters in this book, particularly General Zhidao is the most fascinating character. He is very complex, especially in this first book. He comes across as very morally gray to the point of possibly being morally black because he makes terrible choices in order to win battles. Now, I mentioned that this is hard science fiction and it's definitely dense. The beginning of this book is really hard to get into because you're just thrown into it and there isn't a lot of explanation. Even by the end of this book, I'll be honest, I didn't fully grasp all of the strategy and technical terms that were introduced. By the later books, it did become a little bit easier, but this book is definitely not for beginners. So if you're just starting out in science fiction, I don't recommend starting here. However, for those of you that are more comfortable in the genre, this is definitely one to check out. It's just so different than anything else I've read before, which I found really refreshing. And I am at the point that I read enough science fiction that I'm really enjoying books like this that don't spoon feed me all the details, but really allow me to explore the world in a more natural way. And I like a book that challenges me. I like a book that kind of makes me think a little bit more and work a little bit harder. It's honestly the kind of stories I've been craving this year, and this one definitely delivered. I really enjoyed the strategy aspects to this book. Even though I don't normally like military science fiction, this one just worked for me, and while I probably didn't fully grasp the details of all the strategy, I still enjoyed the scenes where they discussed it. Now, I mentioned that I not only read this book, but then I went on to read the second and third book. And so without spoiling anything, I'll let you know that my favorite of the series was Stratton. I love this book. This book made this trilogy a favorite of mine because there's so much humor in this book, and no one talks about the humor in this series because I think everyone's so intimidated by how complex it is, but you realize that Yoon has a great sense of humor and really weaves it into his story in a subtle way, but once you know it's there, you realize how much humor is there. And I really liked what they did with the character of General Zhidao in the later two books. I can't really say what happens, but I love those twists and turns. I just thought the character work got better and better. And while I found the first book to be pretty hard to get into, I actually think that the second two books are much easier to understand, partially because I'd already spent time in the world, but I also think that the stories are a little bit more straightforward. So even if you've only read Ninefox Gambit, please continue on with the series. It's well worth finishing. Absolutely loved it. And again, a new science fiction favorite of mine. And finally, I do want to mention I also received the short story collection from Rebellion, and I've just started, so I really can't give you a full review, but I am someone who doesn't normally read a lot of novellas and so forth set around a main series. I typically just read the core books, but this is a case that is definitely the exception because when I finished the trilogy, I just wanted more. Not a criticism, simply the fact that I was just so in love with the world and the characters. And this kind of reads like fan fiction, but in the best possible way because I just want more General Zhidao in my life. And so I'll report back when I finished it, but I can pretty much already tell you that I'm loving it. Next, I want want to talk about Alpha Omega by Nicholas Bowling, and this is one I received from the publisher Titan Books. This is set in a near future that is very close to home, but we simply have a little bit more technology in our day-to-day lives. This story is told over a few different perspectives, one being a boy who finds a human skull in his school playground. Another is set from the perspective of a boy who has been kicked out of school and expelled and is now spending his time in a VR environment playing a video game. And then there's also the perspective of one of the teachers who is trying to figure out something that is going on in the virtual reality and in the online community that is involved with the school, because a lot of this book really centers around this specific school that is being commercially funded, and that is a really large piece of the story, something I really enjoyed because if you don't know, I'm married to a teacher, and so I love the fact that it really takes on the idea that because education is so underfunded, you see these commercial businesses coming in and sponsoring schools. But while this is already happening today, this book very much takes it to the next level, and so you get to see how the school is so heavily influenced by these other commercial entities, and it's very much a satire in some ways, but at the same time there's a lot of serious things going on in this book. This book is compared to things like Stranger Things, Ready Player One, and Black Mirror, and while I understand why they are drawing those comparisons, I don't really think any of them really fit, so keep that in mind. This book really is something else, and it's a little bit hard to talk about and review because there are a lot of different moving pieces going on. You have these seemingly unrelated plots happening, and I'll be honest, it took a while for them to kind of come together, and I wasn't completely satisfied with how the story did pull together, and that a bit comes from my reading preferences. I really like a tight story with a really strong narrative push, and I didn't really know where this book was going for the most part, and it just was done in a kind of way that felt unsatisfying to me at least. But if you're intrigued by the concept, if you're someone who likes a story with a large factor of virtual reality, which is definitely something I find really interesting in my science fiction, this one is cool to check out. Again, it's more accessible because it is set very close to our modern day, and it's a little bit of a mystery because you know something is going on in this other world and you get to see the different perspectives, just learning about it. It did remind me a bit of the Otherlands books by Tad Williams, so if you enjoyed those stories, you might enjoy this as well. So a difficult one to talk about because there is so much going on, but it was a really cool one to check out. I'm definitely glad I got an opportunity to review it. Next up, we have The Relentless Moon by Robinette Kowal, and this is the third book in the Lady Astronaut series, but again, I'm going to talk about this series in a way that's going to keep it all spoiler free in case you are not caught up. And this book is set in a world where there is an alternate history that happened where there was a meteor shower that basically caused the space program to be accelerated, and in doing so they had to bring in female astronauts much earlier than they did in our actual history. And so in this third book we follow a female astronaut named Nicole who is married to a very renowned senator, and she is a pilot, and at the beginning of the story you know that she's going up in space and will be living on the moon for a while. You find out that there is a lot of discontentment happening on Earth at the moment because there are a group of people that are not happy with the push to send humanity to the moon and the Mars, and they are upset because they know that while humans are trying to save as many people as possible, there are going to be those that are left behind. And understandably, there is a lot of growing unrest and riots that are starting to break out. And so at the beginning of the story, you find out that there is some sort of sabotage going on. And the main character, our astronaut Nicole, is tasked at going up to the moon, not only completing her intended work, but also trying to figure out who is working for this radical group. And so this is basically set up as a mystery in space. And for those of you that are like me and think that that concept sounds ridiculously cool, you are right. This is done so well. These books are primarily very character focused, but at the same time, that plot made for a very engaging story with a narrative that just kept moving forward. It's fairly long in terms of page length, but I just flew through this one, absolutely loved it. What I really loved so much about the story was the character of Nicole. For those of you that have read the previous books, I'll say that Nicole is quite different than Alma. While they both come from privileged white upbringings. Nicole is much more confident as a character, and I just liked her a teeny bit better. Obviously, it depends on your personal preferences. But what I also liked about this book is that the author brought in a lot of important issues, from infertility to vaccinations, and I was particularly touched by the representation of an eating disorder, which I thought was done really well, but done in a way that was not triggering. And I just love that representation. This book hit home for me for so many reasons, and I absolutely loved it. I enjoyed the first book, I really enjoyed the second book, and I love this third book. So if you are on the fence about picking up the series, I just say go for it. If you enjoy character-driven books, you will enjoy it. If you enjoy hard science fiction, you will get that too. I really liked that at the end of the book, the author actually took the time to explain some of the history and the real science behind everything that she had written, and I love when authors do that. So highly recommend this one. Definitely one of my favorites of the year so far, and just cannot stop thinking about it. I am in love with the series now. Finally, I want to talk about a novella called An Unnatural Life by Erin Wagner. And this is set in a future where artificial intelligence have just received some kinds of legal rights. And with that comes the fact that there is an artificial intelligence who has been accused of murdering a human that they were working with. And so at the beginning of the story, this artificial intelligence is in jail and is visited by someone who is working as a legal practitioner. And they decide to represent this being and basically make the case for why they may be innocent, or at least represent them and give them a fair shot at having their case be told in the legal systems of the future. Now, while a lot of artificial intelligence stories tend to be really fun, I think a lot of people are used to stories like in the Mass Effect video games or the Wayfarer book series. A lot of times artificial intelligence stories are just really adorable, and it's really cute and very lighthearted, but I want to let you know that this is a case that it takes an AI story and it really goes to some serious places. The tone of this book is quite dark and often depressing at times, and so if you're interested in something like this, I do recommend it. This book is compared to To Kill a Mockingbird, and while it's hard to compare anything to that beloved classic, I do understand why those comparisons are in place. Because of course this book deals with the concept of personhood, but it really deals with the concept of other and rights and privileges and just our biases and prejudices against people that are not like ourselves. So I think that there's a lot of really important messages in this book. It was not the most fun read. It definitely was a bit more depressing than I expected it to be, but overall I really appreciate it, really did enjoy it for what it was. And if you're like me and just cannot get enough of stories that involve the concept and idea of artificial intelligence, this is definitely the next one you should pick up. So that is it for this video. Drop a comment down below which of the books you are most interested in reading of the books I mentioned here. I would love to get more people into science fiction, so I really hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. If you're new here, consider subscribing. I definitely read a lot of science fiction, some fantasy, as well as, of course, horror and thrillers. Otherwise, thank you so much for sticking around. I will talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.